Hello, everyone. Welcome to Borderless Conversations. My name is Kendema, and I'm from Borderless Translations, and I'm based here in Tokyo, Japan. Konnichiwa.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Kilrain. This is, again, Borderless Conversations. I am with Ouen Designs, and I'm based in San Diego, California. Swadika.
Perfect. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about Children's Day or, childhoods of different cultures. What was your childhood like growing up, and how does it differ from everyone else's?
All right. So Children's Day is a thing that's in Japan, correct?
Correct.
Can you tell me a little bit about what happens during Children's Day, or what's this holiday about?
Yeah, so Children's Day, at least to my knowledge, it's also in several other countries. So it's not unique to Japan, but the activities, I believe, are. So one example of Children's Day is that they have flags. Do you know the koi fish?
Yes.
Yes. So they have like really big, like koi fish is basically giant carps. And so they're the ones you see in the ponds. And so what they'll do is that they'll have koi fish flags, and the kids will make koi fish flags and then hang it up on their houses. So when you're walking around the neighborhood, you'll see koi fish, and that's will let you know that oh, it's Children's Day. So that's one of the things that they do.
And what's the purpose of the festival? Is it just to celebrate children, childhood? I mean, what's the intention there?
Yeah, I think like every other holiday, right? National something day. It's just about, awareness and appreciation for children.
Okay. I don't think that we have anything similar in Thailand, although, I mean, I may be wrong. And also regionally, there probably are different cultures, different traditions across different regional cultures in Thailand. In the US, I haven't seen anything similar. Have you?
Not in the US. I mean, I know we care about our kids, but I don't think we have a whole day for them.
Yeah. All right.
So, Elizabeth, the growing up, can you tell me a little bit about your childhood and what was kind of the expected behavior of, a child growing up in a Thai household?
Sure. Thai society is very hierarchical, and it comes both from a religious perspective as well as a sort of traditional patriarchal system. So at the very, very top of society, like the king is also considered a lord in a religious sense. So like
Yes.
a lot of times traditionally the idea that, a monarch is descended from the gods or is a spiritual leader as well. And so that sort of hierarchy comes down through family as well. And a lot of times this also has the idea to do that you gain wisdom as you age.
Mm-hmm.
So, the older someone is, the more deserving they are of respect because of the amount of wisdom that they have gained and the life experience that they have earned. So if you're a child, you're valued, but on the other hand, you are expected to pay respects to absolutely everybody
Yes.
around you. So I think we mentioned last time the Y is our
Mm-hmm.
universal greeting. Everyone is expected to do that, but for children, it's especially expected that they should initiate that, and they should, show a proper amount of respect. So head
Mm-hmm.
lower, hands higher, and adults will even comment on that. It's like, oh, this child is so polite. They're whining even without prompting. I don't have to remind them to do that. How sweet.
You're like, hey.
And then you have to refer to everybody by their titles.
Mm,
And along with that, you're expected to also always defer to the experience, the words, the whatever of someone who's older than you, regardless of
mm-hmm.
whether or not they are correct, or
Yes.
even if they're saying something maybe intrusive, or you're not
Mm-hmm.
but you're still expected to defer to them because they are older.
I see. what are some titles that you have in your culture?
Well, everyone is referred to by their relation to you. So
Mm-hmm.
even if you're not related, everything is kind of a familial reference. So even if someone is roughly your peer, if they're even slightly older than you, refer to them as P, which means like older but in your generation, and Nong for younger.
Mm-hmm.
And then this goes up in case of, you never refer to, if you're a child, you never refer to an adult by their name.
Mm-hmm.
You will say, dad, mom,
Mm-hmm.
grandpa, grandma, auntie, uncle, so on and so forth, but never by their name. The only closest thing you can do is if you're saying kun, which means, Mr., Mrs., Ms., and then their name. But
Yes.
never first name basis, ever, ever,
Mm-hmm.
ever. And
Oh.
you also are, even when you're talking to an adult and referring to one of your friends, you still
Mm-hmm.
have to refer to them by their title plus name. So
Okay.
a good friend of mine, whom I refer to as my brother, Mike, in English, but in Thai, anytime I refer to him, I would say P Mike because he's older
Mm-hmm.
than me. It doesn't
Oh, I
matter
see.
that he's one of my friends and he's in
Mm-hmm.
my same, if I'm talking to another person, I would still refer to him by his relationship to me. And that
Okay.
respect is expected. Yeah.
That makes sense because so just based on the play you're in, Brothers Paranormal Normal, now I know why, because you were trying to summon the ghost, and then you were also said, how do you say the referring to someone who's younger? Nang?
Nong,
Nong?
Nong,
Yes.
yeah.
So yes, now I understand because you're just like,
The
even though
scene where
she
the
was calling the
mother's
name.
telling, yeah, yeah. It's like, we call her Nong what? Nong? Yeah.
No, get over here, basically.
And I do have to say, as a kid, like there are times when like it can be sweet. It's like, little sister.
Yeah.
There's also some times when I was just like, it's like the equivalent in English of someone using your full government name. Like there are times
Yes.
when it's just like, if I hear Nong and it's in that tone, I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, I'm in trouble. I don't know what happened yet, but I'm already shaking. I'm
It's
already
like,
bracing
oh.
for it. Right. What
Okay.
about for you?
So for me, it's yeah, it's kind of weird in a sense that, especially if your parents are like immigrants, and so your household is almost, and it'll depend on whether or not your parents want to integrate the culture of the host country or try to keep it as traditional as possible. So that definitely changes some things. So in my sense, my mom did want to integrate the host country, which is America, right? But she does come from a Liberian household, so it was kind of a mix. So um, in terms of titles, right? We could not get caught calling anybody by their first name. Like it doesn't even matter. And it's so surprising, because in American culture, it's like, oh, you can call that person by their first name. It's fine. I'm just like, no, that's risking my
That's
life.
not okay with you. Right.
Yeah. So I mean, if I'm talking to someone who's not like Black, then I can just say Mr., Mrs., that's fine. If I'm talking to someone who is, in by, the familiar relation, right? I have to usually say like uncle so and so or like auntie so and so, right?
Mhm.
And then that'll also change based on if they're from the church, right? Because then if they're from the church, then I have to say sister so and so, brother so and so, right? And or especially if they
Elders
have
and
a title. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right.
Deaconess, deacon, like who am I? I was like, oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, sir. Like I
Sorry.
didn't refer to you by your proper earned title. Right.
Yes, yes. So
For
and it's
sure.
hard too, because one thing, like when you're young, you have to always show that respect. You always have to make sure that you're giving respect. But it's hard when you get older, right? Because sometimes people do not forget. They're just like, oh, I remember when you were like 6. And I'm like, I'm 30 right now. I just
Right.
it never changes. But like how do you feel? Do you think that, once you become, quote unquote, like an adult, are you treated differently, or do people still say, oh, this is still Nong?
Oh yeah, that never ends. So you
Mhm.
could be 60, but if someone is a generation older than you, you better give
Yeah.
them their respect. Um, and then you still refer to people as like P or Nong if they're in your generation, your peer group.
Hmm.
Um, there are some interesting pieces to that too, though, because I feel that things change in the sense of their expectations of you. So, like as a child, you have certain expectations in terms of behavior,
Hmm.
but not necessarily in terms of what you should accomplish in life. And
Yes.
then when you get to an adult, they judge you as an adult in terms of by this age, you should have accomplished X, Y, and Z. But
Hmm.
at the same time, they still think that they can meddle in anyone's lives if they're a generation older or so on and so forth,
Yes.
especially if they're family. So it's always kind of interesting in that sense of like gossip goes all around families.
Hmm.
Every auntie and uncle can comment on your life regardless of what they do know or not, or if it's even true.
Yeah.
They can be like, oh well, fine, you're a fancy doctor and such, but you still haven't found a husband. Like
Jesus.
so
Status.
it is interesting. But going back to expectations as a kid, like how
Hmm.
this is kind of further across society as well. We have in every discipline, it has its own why cruel ceremony. Why meaning,
Yep.
of course, the greeting, and cruel meaning teacher. So like Muay Thai has a particular one. Your regular schools have one.
Hmm.
If you're in a special vocation, so like a school of massage, any kind of traditional one, or a school of Thai classical dance, they all
Yes.
have their own ceremonies. But that really emphasizes this hierarchy. Like it's not just a normal pay respects to a teacher like an apple or a gift basket at the end
Hmm.
of the year, but there's this whole ceremony where like all the teachers are up on a podium
Yes.
and they're all sitting there, and the kids line up to like kneel at each teacher's feet
Hmm.
and receive their blessing, and to give them respect and give them flowers and so on and so forth. So like from an outsider's perspective, it's almost worship, but there's this idea that you must be grateful for the wisdom of the elders that have passed down onto you. So
Yes.
there's this very, very well enforced idea. And this is regardless of whether, it's a good teacher or they're not a good
Hmm.
teacher. It's just this, by their role in society and by the fact that you are a child, you must pay this respect. And by the fact that you're a student in relation to them, you
Yes.
must pay this respect. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I didn't know that there were so many different, ceremonies based on, as a student, and also depending on, like you said, martial arts, right? So it'll depend on how well integrated these things are within your culture, right? So,
Right.
okay, that's definitely interesting.
Is there an equivalent like a teacher's day or something in Japan?
A teacher's day. No one cares about the
I don't know,
teachers.
because I was just wondering because I do know that I feel that in Asian societies, a lot more respect is given to the idea of someone being a teacher, regardless of whether you're a teacher of a language or a teacher
Hmm.
of, at a school, or even, a teacher of dance or singing, whatever. It's just the idea that teaching is a respected vocation. So I would imagine that there's at
Yeah.
least something similar.
I would say that I don't, to my knowledge, I've never heard anyone celebrating Teacher Day. But of course, everyone gives the title, sensei, right? So we often just, make sure to just say, hey, 90 sensei, or sorry, 90 is just like what? Or so yeah, 90 sensei. Um, but sometimes we don't even say, that teacher's, actual name. They just become the title sensei. So you could actually go through your whole school year and just calling
Oh,
this
no.
person sensei. And you'd ask, oh, did you talk to sensei? And people would be like, oh, which sensei? I'd be like, oh, I actually don't know this person's name. Um but people, I guess, it is, people do show the highest respect for teachers of many different kinds. So whether it's martial arts, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a professor at a university, people do call you sensei to show you that respect. And to ask them to do otherwise is it's just impossible. You can't, it's just impossible. So and then teachers themselves, they do take their profession very seriously. And so they do work like really long hours because of the position and the respect that they have for the title as well.
Okay, makes sense. I was just thinking on your comment about like you go for the whole school year and realize you don't actually know the person's name. I feel like I have similar things from childhood, except instead of an issue with teachers, I don't know some of my family members' names.
Oh, everyone's
It's like auntie, uncle, great uncle, cousin, such and such, whatever. And I know them by their position in the family. I'll even know whose brother or sister they are and how many times removed from which member of the family. But I'm like, I don't know their name. Or if I know their name, I know their nickname. Like I don't know what their real name is. Like I don't know their government name. I know, oh, it's Natip, like Tip. I can't, like, if I had to find out their info, maybe do a Google search for their address so I can send them something, I'll be like, shoot, I can't look up Auntie Tip online.
You're just like, oh man.
and having gone through most of my childhood, never ever actually knowing their real name. I just know like this is, the wife of so and so who's my grandmother's brother.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the interesting about Japanese culture as well, because you can just address people just by their title, right? Their name becomes less important. And so there are times where like people are like, oh, you're, hey uncle, or hey auntie, or like, hey bro, hey sis, and it's like, and you don't really need to know like anyone's name. For Black culture, right, this gets even more confusing in terms of not titles, but I guess maybe a bit about titles, because sometimes when you have a close relationship with somebody, right, everyone is your uncle, everyone's your aunt, everyone is your so-and-so. It's like, oh, this is your cousin. That one was the biggest one for me, where my mom would just be introducing me to these kids and be like, hey, this is your cousin. I'm like, oh, how are you related? Don't ask those questions, just don't worry about it. And then I don't, right, because you don't question.
Because you were told.
Yeah.
You were told by an elder explicitly not to ask.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So now later in life, I'm just be like, oh, this is my cousin, and I just don't even I don't even know how we're related, but I'm like, whatever. It doesn't matter.
and you might not be, right? They might be cousins because they are kids of a family friend that you've always called uncle or auntie.
Yes.
And it's not even necessarily that. And then, I've had those situations where years and years later, I'm like, how exactly is auntie so-and-so related? And they're like, they're not. Wait, what? But they're always here.
No, yeah,
like,
exactly.
That's why they're auntie. Oh, okay. I guess that makes sense. They're always here, so they're for the family. Oh, that's all I need to know.
Because maybe I think it might also have to do with kind of like discipline and like responsibility a bit, because at least in my culture, right, it's anyone can discipline you. That's kind of like the general rule. So if they see you acting up in the street, right, and you're acting up, and someone's yelling at you or telling you, hey, don't do that, or they pop you one real quick, if someone outside of that familiar group comes, be like, oh, who's this person, and be like, yeah, this is my uncle. Right. And then it's like, it's fine. But if you say, oh, this is Mr. So-and-so, right, people might look at you like, oh, how could you say that to that child, or how could you put your hands on that child or something?
Yeah, there's a couple different things where like anyone's allowed to discipline when I was growing up. So one comes back to that respect piece. It's like, if you are disrespectful to an elder, and someone catches you being disrespectful to an elder, that elder, or literally anyone else around, can be like, how can you be so rude? What a terrible child. Yeah. Right. And it depends on the escalation of it. Sometimes you just get told off, other times you get popped. And this doesn't matter the circumstance. It's like, this can be, well, at home for sure, because they're your family, they're allowed to. But in school also for sure, because the idea that, teachers have ultimate authority. So like, if you disrespect a teacher, you can get punished for it. And on the street, I think it really depends. So like, you can't just randomly like pop a child if they're like, you know, being loud in the street and you don't like it, because
Yes.
that's not a commonly accepted social offense. But you know, if you decided to be like, you know, if two kids were playing in the street and one was nasty and pulling in another one's hair, and especially if it's an older child to a younger child, because the idea that an older child has responsibility for the younger ones,
Yes.
doesn't matter if they're related to you or not, like you cannot be nasty to someone younger than you. Then an adult can come over and is like, how can you be so nasty to Nong? Right? You know, you're not setting a good example. You're such a terrible like older brother, sister, like you're such a terrible example of a child, pop, you know. So, and that doesn't matter, like it can be you're playing, you know, you're playing with some other kids outside an auntie's storefront, and then auntie sees you being nasty to another kid and come out and scold you, sometimes even come out with a broom and scold you, and like, you know, there's a threat in that broom. Did you ever have I don't know, because like you know, friends with different experiences. I have something equivalent, like in Thai culture, it's like, you know, the bamboo switch.
Yeah.
But I've also heard like lots of friends from the South, or just in more like classically like conservative households where, you know, you get hit with a switch or a paddle, or you get sent out to pick the switch that you get hit with. And the idea behind that, not whether or not you believe in corporal punishment, but not a matter of being nasty, but more like, you already know what you did wrong, so therefore you have to go pick your tool of punishment. I don't know if there's something like equivalent, or something you experienced as well.
It's so for, I want to say it's usually for like the switch is the go-to choice of discipline, as well as, you know, on more the American side, it's the belt, right? You know, go get my belt, right? But luckily my mom wasn't so big on corporal punishment, so I was kind of like, I don't want to say I got lucky, because then instead of like physical like punishment, she'd be like, all right, what do you love? Oh, you love your PlayStation? All right, give that to me. You're like, what?
Like everything in this house belongs to me anyway.
You know, exactly, basically. Oh, that's definitely so yeah, it's definitely the belt. I was fine, but like my older brother, he would often, because I have older half siblings, and they would get the corporal punishment, right? So my dad would just say, hey, you know, check your grades, you know, okay, this is unacceptable, go get the belt. And then they would like just line up in the middle of the room, and I'm just off to the side watching this, right? And they would just be like, wham, wham. And then, you know, when I saw that, I'd be like, you know what? I'm gonna get some good grades. Right. The threat of it was enough. Right. Yes, it's just like, it was enough for me. So thanks, bros, sis. You know, you took one for the team, right?
Yeah, I don't think that this is so much in schools in the US. I didn't really attend schools in the US, but I mean, as far as I understand, like now it's definitely not allowed, but I'm not sure that it was allowed way back either. But in Thailand, and this is especially with public schools, and especially even more so in more rural schools, like, you know, you'd have your punishments that might be more classic ones, like, you know, you have to clean the classroom and the chalkboard and whatever else, and the erasers and all that. But then you got, you know, the worst ones, which is like, you know, you're standing there with your arms out and 2 pails of water, and like you can't spill a drop, and your arms get shaky. So it's not quite corporal punishment, but it's definitely a physical punishment. Like it's the, you know, this is going to feel miserable in about 3 minutes. So while you're holding these buckets of water, think about what you did. My mother would tell stories though, like when she was talking about when you had to grade the homework for the night before. Yeah. And so the teacher would just go down the desks in like alphabetical order, essentially like in name order, and be like, question 1, you, question 2, you. And like, you know, anytime you got a question wrong, it was like, bam, ruler on the palm of the hand. And she was like in the middle of the classroom or something like that. So she's like, sitting there in dread as the teacher's coming down the rows of desks. Being like, oh, please let my answer be right. Please let my answer be correct for
Wow.
each homework piece. So there's also that. It's like, the similar to the getting scared into good grades, except that was like at school. But she did say that if they had come home from school, and she was in Singapore. So in I think she went to like a Chinese Presbyterian girls' school in Singapore. But like because the teachers did have that authority, if the kids came home and clearly had marks or something that said that they were disciplined by the teacher, they might get a second disciplining by their parents, because like, what did you do? Like, I didn't send you to school in order for your teacher to be disappointed in you. Like, what did you do? It's like, oh, double punishment.
Exactly. You don't, if you get one punishment, you don't speak about it to anybody.
Did you have the thing though where it's like if you did get in trouble at school and you're like, I hope my parents don't find out, and then you get in more trouble if you didn't tell?
I mean, yeah, there have been situations where, I've had, my grades have not been good. And it's just like, okay, so I need to intercept this report card before anyone sees this. And and the thing about it is, though, it's like, I know my parents' schedule, right? And I know and like sometimes I know that they're busy, so I'm like, okay, they're not gonna ask me about my grades. So but the thing is, though, if things progressively keep getting worse, then instead of sending a report card, they're going to get a direct call. And when that direct call comes, and it always does, that's when things get really bad.
Right. And at that point, it's like, were you hiding this from me the whole time? I wasn't actively hiding it. I just wasn't talking about it.
It's like, confess. I'm like, I did it.
I'm sorry, my grades are bad. Oh man.
But yeah, like as a kid, oh sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, as a kid, it's scary. Like the amount of fear you have of like perceived discipline. Like you've experienced like the actual discipline, and then the perceived like discipline is what really gets you. Like because it's just like you don't think straight. You just show them your report card and say you'll do better next time. But it's like, but like in your kid's head, you're like, I have to do this whole like heist or whatever. Gotta this is the only solution. But yeah.
Right. I always thought it was really interesting when I first came to the US. One, like back to the expected behaviors thing, where like I would hear kids call their parents by their first names, and I'm like, that's are you trying to get killed today? And it's like, no, it's fine. And especially when friends' parents would be like, oh no, call me Colette. I'm like, yes, Mrs. Johnson. Like, there's just no way. I can't do that.
Like, nope.
Yeah. And then but also at school, like I would never expect if unless a teacher did something that was way out of what's socially acceptable.
Yeah.
But I would never expect, like, if a teacher disciplined me, for my parents to go to school to advocate for me, unless they did something that was unacceptable in their role as a teacher.
Yeah.
And so when I'm hearing of stories of like parents going to school, it's like, how dare you give my child this grade, or, how dare you put my child in detention? And my mind's just a little bit blown. And I was like, okay, this is definitely a different cultures thing, because like, and I mean, that's not across the US, but yeah, anytime I hear that, usually it's from like, wealthier or white, like primarily white or suburban communities and things like that, where parents will be like, you're not allowed to discipline my child. You're not allowed to give my child good grades. And that's just such an interesting thing to me, because I feel like that's kind of a flipped piece, where instead of it's the child's responsibility to fulfill those expectations, it's now the teacher's responsibility to make sure the child is like at least perceived to achieve something, or the child has a pristine record. I mean, that's just a really interesting thing to me. Like, I feel like that's definitely a huge cultural difference.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have to say that, like, I feel like Black parents don't really mess around with their kids, especially when it comes to, like, it's a two-way street. I feel like when it comes to like your child and teacher kind of relationship. They always say, "Oh, be respectful, listen to your teacher. If you need help with math, don't come to me, talk to your teacher." And it's always it's always about, hey, they have the answer. But then, I have seen it time and time again where teachers, I don't know, maybe it's because teachers think that they know everything, or, they might not think that they're wrong, but especially sometimes their behavior towards like Black kids, right? It's kind of like offensive. And so
Oh,
they don't know it, or maybe they do know it, right? And because the kids is so, respectful, they think, oh, they're not going to say anything, right? And then all of a sudden, the mom pulls up or the dad pulls up to the school, and then that teacher gets cursed out. So I've seen that many times before. And it'll depend, right? It'll depend, because sometimes you don't know what the reason is, but if they feel that their child is in danger, they'll step up
right,
every time.
for sure.
Yes.
Right. And I think that comes back to if a teacher behaves out of their realm of responsibility, or they're behaving something like, because there's an expectation that way too, right? Like, you're a
Hmm.
teacher, you're an authority figure, you're an adult, you should know better than to act a certain way.
Yes.
And if I put my child in your hands and you are nasty to my child, or you humiliate my
Hmm.
child, or all the stories in the US of like teachers commenting on a child's hair, or even like cutting their hair and all the kinds of stuff
Yes.
like that, that's something where it's like, oh no, you put your hands on my child, that is not
Yes.
allowed. And so for sure, yeah, in those cases, but in this case I think like it's very much like that's an abuse of authority,
Correct.
right? And if a teacher abuses authority, that's definitely a like, no, now you are not living into what I expected of you and your role.
Hmm.
You're not being a person of integrity. You're not honoring your responsibility as a teacher, and how dare you?
Yeah, exactly. The one incident I had growing up was, so I was, originally born in Newark, New Jersey. And then when I moved to Minnesota, right, that's kind of when I first really experienced a lot of like kind of like racial discrimination on the institutional level. And I went to this elementary school, and for reference, like my full name is like McIsiah. And so like so when you hear McIsiah, right, you're just like, oh, where's this guy from, right? And and so that's what they thought. So they saw my name, and instead of putting me in like a regular like English class, they put me in the ESL class. And so
That is sweet. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I spent my first couple of years of my life in LA actually before I went to
uh-huh.
Thailand, and my mother was fuming because she's like, my child's a natural born citizen. How dare you?
Yes. Yes. Okay. So it's not just, okay. So I guess this is more
Yeah.
common than I thought. So my mom, she found out about this, right? And she went to go talk to the teacher. And the teacher was just like, oh no, we just want him to get accustomed. It's like, he is American. What are you talking about? He knows what he's doing. And then so she's like, okay, okay. The teacher said, hey, how about we just have him test, and then we'll just see. And my mom was like, all right. And she this is when I know my
The
mom
whole
is
attitude is like,
this is when I know my mom is dead serious. When she is just like, okay, and she looks at me, she goes, take that test. Just like I was like, all right. So this was back when I think fourth grade. And then I took like a reading test and a few tests, and I ended up being like reading at an eighth grade level. So I was like two grades above like the standard. And so like I got switched out real quick. So after that, I don't think the teacher, she was still my main teacher, but she didn't say nothing to me.
yeah, I spent first grade. This was back when California still had standardized testing. So
Yeah.
my first, I think, from when I was born till about middle of third grade, I was in the LA area, and it was a very mixed area.
Mm-hmm.
And there was also a lot of Asian immigrants there, but there was also a lot of Black kids, a lot of, Latinx kids. And it was one of those things where the school never explicitly said anything, but a lot of
Mm-hmm.
parents had that sense of the administration wasn't so happy about how many non-white kids were in that school.
Yeah.
So this was when California still had standardized testing. So every 6 months we had to take this test,
Mm-hmm.
and it would grade your, writing, reading comprehension, your math skills, so on and so forth. And I was consistently in 98th and 99th percentile.
Yes.
So tell me why. First grade, I was in normal class. Second grade, they put me in ESL class. Same school. I'm like, explain to me how I can have writing and reading comprehension at 99th percentile and I need to go into an ESL class. But at that time, it was also interesting because this was when there was GATE program, under junior high level, because I think now they only do it like junior high and above, but they had it at elementary school at this time. So I was spending 3 days a week at GATE program and then 2 days a week at an ESL class. And I was just very confused because I'm like, if I'm not good enough, and my mother, like, she's a very passive person, like culturally from the perspective of like, I'm an Asian immigrant, don't make waves. But this, she was fighting with my principal about. And they're like, at that point, they're like, oh, well, the classes are already arranged. We have a fixed class size, so you have to sit there. But it was really interesting because I looked around me. I'm like, oh, they stuck all of us in this class. Like you had like all your Asian kids and all your Hispanic kids in this class. And I was like, And a lot of them
something's
were
up.
born and they were all born in the US. So I was like, okay. Okay then. Sure. Whatever.
So I guess my next question then is how did it feel like kind of watching your mom go through that kind of situation? Do you like, I guess, I mean, this might be like a different topic for maybe next time, but how was it difficult for your mom to kind of like advocate for you? Like, did she go through a lot of like hurdles in that sense? Or I don't know, just tell me a little bit about that situation.
Well, my mother isn't a person who speaks up very much in the moment, but then she kind of like broods on it and gets very angry after the fact, like, this society, blah, 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 how dare they, and so there was definitely a lot of that. And, there was a lot of frustrations, that feeling that she didn't have the power to speak up because she wasn't taken seriously because she had an accent. It didn't matter if she had an advanced degree from the US or whatever. Like, she wasn't taken seriously because she had an accent. She's also tiny. Like at that time, I think she was 5'1". She's now like almost 4'11".
What happened?
She got older and she shrunk. But she's a small woman. So she definitely felt like, people didn't take her seriously. They didn't take her seriously because she was an immigrant. And they didn't take her seriously because she was small. And so there was just a lot of frustration based on, and then she often comments that, what does she say? She says, Americans use a lot of words, as in they use a lot of jargon to try to get you to agree to something or to try to talk over your head, is what she's saying. She's like, I'm not stupid, but don't talk to me like that, So there was definitely a lot of that. And one of the things, like later on in life, like as an adult chatting with her, she would often say, it's like, if I had the money, I would have hired a lawyer and sued the crap out of that school, just
exactly.
Yeah. So it is kind of interesting. It's like there's definitely the, she would never dream of, if I was disciplined for the correct reason, she would never dream, like, if I was misbehaving or disrupting class or something that was reasonable, or if I got in a fight at school, like if that would ever happen, it's like, oh no, by all means, like teach my child. Like that's in her culture. But on the other hand, the idea of if someone isn't fulfilling their responsibilities, or they are actively discriminating against, and she didn't often use the word discrimination because she hated the idea of being a victim. So she didn't necessarily say it was discrimination. She would just say, like, they're not acting right, like they're not behaving correctly or whatever like that. And and it was always interesting because, like, you know, the more she ended up learning about US society, the more she would be
Mhm.
like, you know, if only I, you know, had the money then, or if I knew about this, or, you know, there was an organization that would such and such, then I would have sued them, you know. She's like, it's the American way. I would have sued them.
Yes. Get that coin. Yep.
Right. For sure.
Yeah, it's definitely, advocacy, and especially when to use it. It is kind of hard, as a parent and like a child, right? Because typically you're expected to just like follow authority, right? And so when, because then it's like, okay, as a child, when do you know they're crossing a line, and when do
Right.
you like report it? And so one thing, I think that's hard for every culture, but I think in Japan it's especially difficult, because of how strict they are in terms of hierarchy. And so one issue that is kind of really bad in like the younger generation is bullying, right? I mean, I don't want to say just younger generation, but it's just, that, bullying is really tough, because what happens is that, depending on, who your teacher is or who the school board is, they kind of want to keep everything quiet, because it's, it's shameful, right? So
Reputation.
if
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So if you're getting like bullied, right, and you tell your teacher, the teacher will probably do nothing. And then the bullying will probably continue. And then, you can try to talk to, the school board, or you can talk to your parents. But then if the parents come in and they talk to the school board, typically what will happen is that school will be like, oh, it's not a big deal. We'll take care of it. But they won't. And so it's tough, because, then the parents are just like, okay, like the school board said it, they said they'll take care of it, so I guess there's nothing else for me to do. And if it continues, then you don't really have any other outlets to to address the issue. So which usually what happens is that they'll just transfer schools.
It's like we've pursued it to the highest level and nothing's being done, and therefore
Hmm.
we can't stay here if we wanted to change.
Yeah.
Oof, yeah. Do you also I don't know if this is in Japan, but I do see this in Thailand, and I do know that my friends have told me it happens in Korea. So in very sort of like hierarchy based societies where you
Hmm.
also have a almost expected like built in hazing ritual of the senior students versus the junior students, kind of thing like that. So like if you're a higher year student, then you
Yep.
demand respect from the younger years. And you can even get to the point where, like, you know, no, you're running errands for me, or you're
Hmm.
grabbing my lunch for me, or you have to, you know, do this and that. And it's almost expected as a rite of passage. It's like, oh, well, you're the younger student, so you have to
Hmm.
do that until the senior level. Then you can find your own juniors to haze. I don't know if that's a thing so much in Japan.
It's, I guess I don't know the real like nitty gritty of it, but there is, the senpai kohai system, which is like, your senior and your junior relationship, and that is applicable all through life, right? And so, but just like how we're talking about, expectations, yes, the junior is supposed to listen to the senior, do them favors, help, when they're sent, you need to go, do the task or the errand. But at the same time, the responsibility of the senior needs to be, hey, you need to not abuse your authority, take care
Mm.
of your junior, and make sure you're guiding them the correct way. And so what happens though is that there's a disconnect where only because like it's easy to send people for stuff, right? Because that's always going to happen. But on the other hand, how often do you need to call on your senior to do something for you, right? And if you're so used to just saying, oh, do this, do this, do this, do this, right? I'm not gonna want to even ask you anything. Right? So it definitely exists. And it's, I don't know, I want to say a rite of passage, because like I said, it can be abused. So but definitely in sports, that is very considered as a rite of passage.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. I don't do know that in in Thai secondary schools as well as in Thai universities. And it really depends. I feel like it depends on the school and the region as well. But sometimes there's like, that combined with your sort of classic, like you got your clique culture in more competitive schools. And then like either like more difficult secondary schools to get into or more difficult universities to get into, then you have that whole like, oh, I've earned my place here, so you have to listen to me when you're coming in. But then, it also depends on department. I think like, when you have your super, super ultra like heavy workload department, I think people are, the kids are less likely to get into the BS because they're too swamped with homework and stuff to play that game. Whereas in some of them, becomes like the whole like, well, hey, boom, trip them. What are you doing? You're not showing respect. Oh, I'm sorry. Pick that up. and just little, like not the really, really terrible bullying, but it still is bullying. Like it's kind of an abuse of your position. So yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Well, outside of that, like, kid habits. I do know that when I was little, especially in Thailand, like we have a huge street food culture, street carts and all that. So after school, there was like a couple options. I think that was like one of our expected, our time as kids, right? Like the time between like after school and dinner. Yes, you had to get your homework done sometime in between that.
Yes.
But besides that, like you were allowed to go play sports or just be outside to play. There was also a bunch of street carts outside our schools. It's like they knew when the kids get off school. So it'd be like, hey, here's a bunch of snacks and drinks and all this stuff. And it was always felt like very tempting as a kid. And I felt like we had a fair amount of freedom in Thailand. Like there's a lot more social trust there. In the US, I feel that a lot of parents are like, oh no, like I have to pick up my kids from school, or, we have to arrange someone to pick them up because it's not safe. Whereas like kids regularly took public transit to school, walked to school. You might still have a buddy system, but for the most part, like we had a lot of freedom after school. So it's like, let's go get a snack, let's go play a game, let's go whatever. How is that like compared to the way you grew up, or, how it is in Japan?
That's, I think now in America, that's a very true statement. But I think it also depends on what generation you're a part of. Because like I'm from the 90s, so we were kind of like, my mom was just like, hey, I'm working, I got to pay the bills, so make it happen.
Entertain yourself.
So I would often, like my mom would work nights, and so she wouldn't be able to pick me up after school. So I'd always have to arrange a ride with either, my coach or, one of my friends once we started driving. And so in that sense, we're pretty independent. I mean, of course, once you get your driver's license, then it's like, oh, carpool with your friends. In Japan, it's almost very similar, where, the first couple of days of school, they will direct their kids to, the school and back. It's like, hey, this is your way home, this is your way to school. And then after that's done, they're on their own. So you'll see kids almost as young as, I want to say 6, with like their like yellow hat and like their backpack, and they're walking to school or walking home. And that's just considered normal. And so they take the bus, they take the train. Oh, I always feel so bad when I see kids have to take the train during rush hour, because it's just like these are all the adults, and then this is the this is the one child. And so I would say that they're fairly independent in the for their childhood, especially in that sense.
Okay. Yeah, I do know. I mean, this is my information from the 90s. So like from classmates who had come from Japan, but like, I think it's still the case where Japan overall has a very low crime rate, and any like major thing becomes like sensational news, like a child was kidnapped or someone did this or that. But for the most part, like people follow the rules, right? So I'm assuming that there isn't nearly as much fear about like, oh, it's not safe for my child to be out there going to school. And also I've heard Japan described as kind of an eye of society type environment where it's not just people follow the rules, but people are watching other people if they don't follow the rules. So I think that there's, from that perspective, parents may have less fear of things like predators or their kid being kidnapped or things like that.
I agree with that statement. No, I agree with that statement. It's definitely like, the nail that sticks out gets hammered, right? And so if you're expected to follow the rules, and then if you're not following the rules, there are people who are watching you who shame you, not verbally, but like Japanese people like to stare. So like they'll like, so it's like, you're just like, if you feel self-conscious about anything, you might want to just prepare yourself, especially if you're kind of different. So if you're, if you're eating on the train, for example, it's frowned upon to eat on the train. And so if you're eating on the train, and it's real quiet on the train too, you're just like, and then all of a sudden, like, everybody will
Everyone's
just
just
be
looking at you.
I
mean, I feel like some of this, I mean, you mentioned the whole like your mom's working, and so you had to figure out how to entertain yourself. I also feel like even that kind of comes into like a rite of passage for kids too.
Yes.
So like there was a really interesting discussion that happened a little while ago. And again, like I feel like this is very community specific. So especially like in dance scenes, or people who come out of like, very much more like suburb type environments, where a lot of people I've seen say like, oh, I don't see the point of sports. We should just get rid of all kinds of sports. And like my gut reaction was just being a little bit offended by that, because I was just like, look, you might not be a person who likes sports, but like there is a very important social role that plays in societies, especially as kids, because you are expected after school on weekends, whatever, just be outside. Like, don't bother me. This is adults' time. You gotta entertain yourself. And whether it was through sports or through kind of like social competitive games, that's how you learn social skills. It's like, oh, I don't know anybody. Well, go make friends. I guess you should solve that problem.
Yes.
And it's like, if we had an open field, we would kick a ball or something representing a ball, if that was a soda can or, whatever it was. If there was a 2 trees or a telephone pole and something else, we would string up, borrow a clothesline and go string up and pretend it's a net and do a takraw, which is like a game that's kind of like a soccer volleyball type thing. Like there's a woven ball that you kick over the net. And like, you just found a way to entertain yourself. And that's how you kind of built your relationships with the neighborhood kids. And, if you weren't athletic, then you stood on the sidelines and heckled. But like either way, you were participating in some way. And I think that was very important for social development. And it was always interesting to me when I see people say like, oh, well, this is stupid. Sports are toxic and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, you must have grown up in an environment where you had other options, like, parents that stayed home all day, or like, a nice public park or library that you could hang out in all the time, right? That wasn't always option, especially the more developing countries that was like, it was even less of an option, because it's not like, oh, I'll just hang in the public library for 6 hours, or I'll go to the community center. Like it wasn't like that. Or like, I'll go home because my parents are home. No, they're at work. It's during the day. So I don't know.
Yeah, that definitely plays a part in it. I 100% agree, because it definitely will depend on your, social economical like status, right? And so if you are more on the wealthy side, you have options, right? Sports is just like, oh, it's kind of like a luxury, right? You can just like, oh, I don't need to do that if I don't have to. But like on the lower end, when you're, when you don't have, lots of finances, right? Like sports is the easiest way to, one, entertain yourself, and then two, later on it's a way for you to earn money, right? And so it's I guess that's just my thoughts. But I definitely agree on you in terms of sports, because I felt the same way. They were like, oh, we're gonna take sports away. I was like, no, I am excelling in all the sports. Why would you take that away from me?
Why would you take my joy away?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that there's a much necessary differentiation between like community slash social sports versus commercialized sports. Like I can understand if people are like, oh, I don't like the way college players are being treated. Cool, I get that. Like, you know, there's an industry and there's a discrepancy. Okay, you can argue about that. Or, you know, I don't like the engine that is the Olympics. Sure, we can also argue about that. But like saying that people should never have competitive gaming, and I'm like, I don't know about that. Like, I feel like it definitely fulfills a social function, especially as kids. Like, you know, you can be the awkward kid, but you know, you have to go and make friends. You have to go and learn to play something. Or at least, you know, hang out with the other kids who don't know how to play and just heckle the people who are playing, or, you know, whatever it is. You have to learn, you have to learn how to do that. And it's harder if you don't learn to do that as a kid, at least in my opinion. Like, I feel like if you're very sheltered and then you get to like, you know, high school before you're learning how to socialize, it's like that much more daunting versus, you know, every neighborhood you play basketball, soccer, whatever else, and now you know how to adapt in some way. You have a tool that you can use in any neighborhood you move to, or any new group of kids you move to, or the next school, or so on.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely. I can see their point in terms of like competitiveness can lead to toxicity. And so it would be good to, in any kind of competitive sport, to kind of talk to people about, you know, that safety cap, right? How can you, you know, make adjustments? Because what does happen when you're young, right? And you're, you know, even if you're heckling people, right? What happens is that, that continued through life, some people are just hecklers all their life. And they won't step forward, they won't do any of the work, and all of a sudden they're always talking, you know, BS. Just like, what's your problem? What's your problem?
Right. That's true. There's actually this little great video. Maybe I'll put a link to this after, so it can be in the link in the video as well.
Yeah.
But there's this little YouTube video that my coworker shared with me, and it's hilarious because it's like, you know, that person who never does their own work, and it's this example of there's a producer who's like, you know, thinking about a new track, and his friend's just like, oh yeah, you know, I've been wanting to work with you. It's like, so when you mean like work with me, like collaborate, you're going to do some work too? You're like, yeah, of course. Like, I just got all the ideas, you know, I just don't know this equipment. It's like, okay, so what's your idea? So it's going to be like, no, right? It's like, oh, okay. And well, I mean, you know, that's just a start, man. And it's like, and on a regular basis throughout this video, he's like, well, you should know, you're the expert. And like, it's like, dude, you talk so much and you contribute so little. So yeah, for sure. Like those also become the childhood patterns that go to adulthood. It's like, you talk so much, you contribute so little. Everybody else has to do your work for you.
Yes.
For sure.
I got ideas. Yeah, I didn't, like, as a kid, I always was like, because I love like video games. So I was just like, oh, I can be the idea guy. I can, like, you know, I can do the story. And then, you know, later in life now, I realized, I was like, yeah, no one can just be the idea guy. No one, you gotta work. You gotta, if you're the idea guy, then you have to like write it up or something. And then you have to do like task, or you have to, there's a lot of more work to just, you know, just saying, hey, this would be a good idea. Like, yeah, but you know.
And you have to know enough about whatever industry it is in. Like, you know, what you can be the ideas person in film or in video games or in music or whatever, but you still have to know enough about the industry to walk other people through how to implement your idea, right?
Yes.
You have to be able to storyboard it. You have to be able to sell it. You have to sell someone else on your concept so they understand what you even mean by your idea. You can't just be like, oh, here's my idea, pay me.
Yes. Yeah, I wish growing up I had, you know, more opportunities to learn about that, because yeah, I don't know about you, but for, in terms of, you know, how can I say it, future roles that I could have as like as a career, right? It was always either doctor, lawyer, like a business person, or maybe a teacher, right? And so and what my, at least what my parents, or what like many like parents in the Black community or even the African community. I mean, I guess in any community, those four professions are kind of like not so much teacher. It's maybe just, you know, they do it for honor, but for the other three, but for the other three, you can definitely make a lot of money. And so it's very easy for people to say, hey, if you do this career, you'll be well off and you'll be taken care of. But like for me, when I expressed an interest in kind of video games, people were just all like, what are you gonna do with that, right? And so it was one of the things as a child that I realized is that if I wanted to do anything that was outside of my parents' realm of knowledge, I had to really do a lot of work in terms of explaining. And so one example is for wrestling, right? You know, my mom, she doesn't know anyone who wrestled, right? But, you know, I was like, hey, I want to wrestle. And she goes, okay, you can wrestle. But then I would always get hurt. So she'd be like, why are you wrestling? Why? Because fractured fingers, bruised ribs, it's just, and she was just like, why are you, I don't see the purpose
Why are you
of
signing
this.
up for something where you come home injured? Right.
Exactly. So I had to explain to her, I was like, hey, this is just, I just like how it feels. I like, having the ability to hone my body and and put it to, the test. And maybe, I don't know, maybe my mom doesn't want to see me hurt in general, but my dad was pretty happy. He was just like, like one time, like during a match, like I was like losing and my dad like just shouted, oh, how can you do that to my son?
Right.
So yeah, definitely managing expectations in terms of like things that are outside of your parents' usual realm. I think that was something that I definitely experienced as a child. But how about yourself?
I feel that, well, I mean, especially with things like hobbies and activities, and my dad is still like this. So I was a little bit upset about this because I was like, hey, do you want to, I had like sent a couple messages and emails about the play, and it was also I get a comped ticket. So if you'd like to see it, or I can, forward you the link to buy the tickets to see it. And, no message from him whatsoever. Cricket. So finally I was like, hi, have you seen my messages? And he's like, yes, I have, but, as talented as you are, I want to remind you that this should not take away from your main career. And I was just like, wow. I was like, at that point, like I'm doing my full-time job on top of these rehearsals. Like these are like extras. So I'm like, I mean, I'm very well established in my career now. I didn't know that was you're not allowed to have hobbies outside your career. How dare. So yeah, along those lines. And I feel like the expectations are that way in terms of you have a good respectable job. And definitely when you said like within your parents' realm of knowledge, my mother is pretty technologically illiterate. Like she way back when. So she lived in the US when I was in Thailand. And I remember getting like an international phone call, like in the middle of the night, like from my mother. And I was just like, hello? And she's just like, my computer's broken. I'm like, okay, tell me what happened. I think I was like 11 or so. She's just like, I turn it on and it won't work. I'm like, okay, but tell me what happened. Like I'm trying to figure out how to walk her through this thing. She's just like, there's just a blank screen with a message on it. I'm like, okay, read me the message. And she's like, non-system disk or disk error, like eject, disk and press any key to continue. And I was like, okay, do you have a floppy in the drive? She's like, yes.
Floppy
I'm
disk.
like, okay, eject the disk. She's like, okay, now what? I'm like, press any key to continue. And she did. She's like, okay, it started. And then she hung up on me. So like my mother is very, very computer illiterate. So from that perspective, she like I started doing like software engineering like when I was much younger, and like I was taking contracts even in high school, and then when I got through college, and that was part of getting through college, like that part of my work through college. And when the economy was terrible after I graduated, I was like, well, let's keep taking contracts. And my mother had no respect for that because she didn't understand it. And it's hard to have respect for something you didn't understand.
Yes.
And then the way she saw it is, I'm not going into an office, so I don't have a real job. And I'm like, I mean, I don't know how to frame this. I'm an entrepreneur, but but she's just like, well, you know, if you got a respectable position, you should have an office. But I'm like, I'd have to pay rent on an office, and I don't need an office for anything except for like maybe 15 minutes to meet someone, which I can do at a coffee shop, where I can rent out the space, like the places you can do meetings in for a half hour at a time.
Yeah.
I don't need an office for that. But like now that the industry has changed, and like, you know, my title is now software engineer. She's like, my daughter's an engineer. I'm like, I haven't changed what I do at all. You understand, like, engineer's a shiny word, but computer stuff is whatever.
Yes,
and it's really kind of funny that way, because like the respectability is attached to the title. And then, you know, along those same lines, like sports, core part of society, and social skills and all that. But I feel like very few parents, unless they are from like a very like, you know, poor background, or just, you know, one where there isn't very many opportunities, so that is the only opportunity. A lot of parents, if they can help it, would rather their kid picked a different career than sports.
Yes.
Like, unless you are like pro sports level, but like as a kid, it's like, why are you spending so much time out on the field? You know, you should be studying more. But on the other hand, also, why are you home right now? Go outside and play. So like, I don't know the difference. I don't know where that line is sometimes as a kid. Yeah.
It definitely depends on the parents, I guess what they want, right? So this, like you said, the sports, you know, at the pro level, if the person is like, hey, you know, this is my dream for my kid, I'm gonna support you, then it makes sense, because then that's their number one priority. But on the other end, that means the educational part just, you know, kind of takes a hit. And then there's the other realm where, you know, it's the opposite. You know, my mom was like, hey, your first, as a kid, your first job is as a student, and everything is secondary. So if I was lacking in my grades, right, then, you know, she wouldn't let me, you know, go to practice. And even at one point, she actually went to my coach and she was like, hey, you know, I can't let him practice if, you know, his grades are, you know, failing. And then, but it was the same thing for a lot of the other, you know, athletes. We're just like, hey, you know, this is where I'm excelling. Why do I have to put this extra time to education? And so my coach, he was just like, all right, you knuckleheads. He's like, all right, you know,
shape up so you can come to practice.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, not even this shape. He was like, okay, it is now mandatory that everyone who has this grade percentage has to do after school tutoring in the subject that they're lacking in. And so he was like, yeah, he's like, no, I need you guys as, you know, on the roster. So go.
Right. And I feel like that is that becomes a formalized requirement when you do get to college or whatever, because like, you know, there's GPA requirements for athletes, and usually those are enforced. The only time I've seen that they aren't enforced is if you have a student from a very wealthy family in a very elite school. Then sometimes they get a little bit fudged or whatever. But like, you know, if you're up and coming and sports is your only, like, you know, you're here on a scholarship, like, you don't want that GPA to drop. You risk losing your scholarship and you can't play. So yeah, for sure. Yeah, but like that, those parents enforcing that to the coach, that's definitely one of those incentives where the coach is like, ooh, I feel like I'm my success is on the line here, because like I might not have a team.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
For sure.
Oh.
I mean, I'm assuming this is kind of across all cultures. Do you feel that the expectations for like what types of activities kids are allowed to get involved in is like very gender based? Like, you know, like I found that as a kid, you know, me getting involved in certain sports was fine, but I can't get too involved in them, otherwise I risk not being ladylike anymore. Or, you know, other people will think that you're very rough and you need to like tone it down a little bit. And so I don't, things like that.
I guess it's harder for me to say, because I think as a man, like a lot, like sports are generally it's acceptable, right? There's not too many things where people will say, hey, you can't do this. I think, yeah, that's a little bit harder, and it does exist. So if you are like a woman, and then there are things where, sports are kind of like, oh, don't get so into sports, don't get so into anything with like lots of physical activity, like even for example, like volleyball, right? So in high school, volleyball was a women's only sport. And then there's also like softball, right? And so even though the ladies would get pretty physical, right? You'd see them, like, but the thing is though, it's like, hey, this is just your like just see it as a hobby, not your main thing. And I think it's the same for in Japan, where, who was it? So for work, we were doing an interview for like a professional soccer player, and they were interviewing like kind of her mom to talk about, because she wasn't like pro level. It was kind of like, I don't want to say amateur, like I don't know how you would, semi-amateur, semi-pro, I don't know what's the best wording for it. Because she would practice, but she would also have like a full-time job, but just with limited hours. And her mom, and right now her brother and her mom were, or sorry, her brother and her daughter, right, were both soccer players. And so they were kind of raised, not yeah, kind of raised differently. And so so the mom talked about, oh, what were the kind of expectations you had of your kids? And she said that for her son, she didn't like the idea that her son was pursuing a, not really, she didn't like it, but she was concerned. She was like, oh, as an athlete, right, you don't have that much, lifelong like career, especially in terms of, you could get injured, something could happen, and then how would you provide for your family? So she said she would prefer if her son would actually not do, soccer, and just get like a full-time salaried job. Now, when she talked about her daughter, and it sounded kind of messed up, but she was like, oh, it's okay for my daughter to do this because I know, like, when she gets married, it's fine.
To have someone to provide for her. Right.
Exactly. It's just like, oh, so I want to make sure that she has the opportunity to do all the things she wants to do. And I'm just like, I was like, wow. I was like, that's like, I understand, but I'm all like, well, so basically you're basically saying like your son is like, because he has like these, like, is the man of the household or whatever, social responsibilities. Yeah. And then I was like, well, you don't have any expectations of your daughter? And she's like, she's like
that is,
so,
I think
yeah,
that's definitely an interesting one because this is something my mother has talked about where, and that also, well, at least in Southeast Asia, that had a lot to do with the class of the household. So it was interesting from the perspective of like, if it was a lower class household, like if it was a more higher class, or at least just more like, good family, like maybe they don't have the wealth anymore, but then there was still the expectation that, the social thing still applies where we hope you get married to a good husband who takes care of you. But you also need to be educated because your education shows in how you present in society. Like,
yes,
your social graces, your manners, your understanding of the little nuances and blah, 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 blah. Whereas she said, some of her classmates would disappear for a little while at a time and even drop out of school. And it was always sad to her because some of them were very, very smart students, but they didn't have that support at home from their working class families because they would get off school and have to take care of the shop and whatever else. And then they would stay up late to study and be really tired and all that. They were trying to excel at school, but it almost was the opposite where like their parents, especially if they were girls, would be like, what are you studying so hard for anyway? Like, you think you're better than me? Like, you think you're smarter than me? And also, you're a girl. What does it matter? Like, do you think men marry you for your brains? And it was just like, whoa, like those. So it was like, it was really dependent on your social expectations for what your future will look like as well.
yes,
Right. So like if you are are of like a certain class or rank in society, then you have to have the education just to learn all of the expectations of that particular rank in society. Whereas if you're in a lower rank of society, for both, you know, the expectation is like, hopefully you find a good man.
Yes.
But your brain is not as needed for a lower rank if it, you know, just work. Like fulfill your physical responsibilities here, not your whatever else. So like it is really interesting. And also from that perspective, that changes how parents see, you know, back to the whole sports and what's the acceptable hobbies too. Because I think we mentioned, or at least we talked about in a previous thing, how, you know, people might, from a US perspective, people see like these 5-6-year-old kids who enter Muay Thai schools and they're like beating the crap out of each other. Like from Americans' perspective, that might be considered like, oh, that's child abuse. How can the families do that? But from a lot of times, this is a working class family, and a lot of times multiple generations are fighters.
Yes.
So it's like this is the only way we can bring glory and accomplishments to our family name. And so like, you know, they're not hoping their kids get beat up, but this is an actual real viable means out of poverty or out of a social position.
It's an opportunity.
Yeah. So it's interesting, but it is also very interesting to see like 7- and 8-year-olds wail on each other. I'm like, oh, like that was a hard hit. I just saw his little head snap that way. Like, yeah. Right? Just,
Bobby.
Like, I mean, as kids, when they fight, they do fight with like, you know, pads and things like that. But even then, I'm still like, oh, they're serious. Like they're, and especially the poorer their background, the more intensely focused they are on that, because it is very serious. Your training is serious. This is your life goal. This is your opportunity. So it's like, you know, just bam. I'm like, oh. Like I'm scared of this child.
Like, wow. Oh
yeah.
So I have a question. That's so how like for me, like for like at least for like, you know, for like African Black society, right? You know, it's kind of, you know, it's okay for like men to kind of know, like, I mean, maybe in general, it's okay for men to know, like, you know, martial arts, you know, how to defend themselves. And then for Thai, then it's for both men, for boys and girls, it's okay for them to learn martial arts at a young age. Is that considered socially acceptable, or?
I feel like that really depends family to family. And it depends on that family's background too. So you definitely see like more working class families, you'll see like the girls go to like Muay Thai camps and stuff like when they're younger. And then you know, for your more common sports, everybody plays them in school. It's like it's required as part of PE and stuff like that. And so it's not, you know, it's even like, ooh, like you did a good job if you're on like the school team and you make like a regional championships or whatever. Like, you know, it is very much part of like the regional sport culture. So like, yes, parents will go and cheer for that. But like for things like martial arts, I feel like the higher class you get, the more it is considered like it's okay for women to learn self-defense, but you don't want to get so into it that it's you're participating in these very unladylike activities, unless you're very, very, very good. If you're going to go into it, you better be the number one. In which case, that transcends just being a physical brutish thing, and now it's like, oh no, you're a master at your craft. But there is definitely a lot of initial opposition. The better, quote unquote, your family is to, but I do feel like that's also generation dependent. Like I feel like the younger generation can more or less get into anything they want. But there's still an expectation of whatever you choose to do, it should not interfere with your social duties, right? So like, it is not okay to get into that and then, you know, come to a family function the next day with like a swollen cheek.
Ooh, yeah, like black eye. Yeah, it's like, how do you explain that one? It's like,
right. And I feel like those things are still not okay for boys, but a little bit more acceptable than they are for girls. So, but you know, there are women Muay Thai fighters and very good ones too. But even socially, it's not talked about as much. Like people will
Yeah.
talk about the ones that super excel, but like people won't be able to name like half a dozen, good male Muay Thai fighters, both past and present, and less so female. So yeah, it's definitely considered like one of those very rough things that women shouldn't get into. But if they do get into it, you better be the absolute best. Like now it becomes a thing of honor versus a thing of like, yeah, my daughter's kind of rough.
Yeah, that's definitely, because it'll also depend on the sport, right? Like you said, like anything that's very physical, like Muay Thai, wrestling, there is a lot more female wrestlers now compared to before. But like it's considered like a very like, brutal, like brutish kind of sport.
Yeah.
But like if it's like cheer squad or like gymnastics, you
Dance. I don't know.
yeah. Those are like, oh, okay, that's okay, that's acceptable.
That's acceptable, right?
But even though it requires almost the same level of physical fitness, what else? The other end would be like, let's say for cheerleading and comp squad, right? Competitive dance. Usually men are kind of looked down upon for joining those, but it's necessary because they have the athletic ability to to do some of these stunts to support the other like members. And so I think that's one thing that we had to kind of get over, especially for me as well, where my thought was like we had someone on the wrestling team who's also on like comp squad, competitive like competitions. And so we were just like, why are you doing this, right? But then all of a sudden he started doing like 3 or 4 different backflips and like crazy stuff. I'm just like, you know what? Maybe I need to join this. Maybe.
Right. I have a coworker, Kelly, and he's Maori. He's from New Zealand, and there he coached volleyball. And then he currently lives in like teeny tiny town in Kentucky because that's where his wife's family's from. So after they've been together for a while, she's like, yeah, I'm over it. Like they were in New Zealand and I miss home. So he's a very chill guy. He's like, let's go. First and only place he's ever been to in the US. He's like, he had never intended to go to the US. So he goes from like, Maori community and Pacific Islander community in New Zealand to like teeny tiny Appalachian town. And where, same thing, like volleyball's only a women's only sport. And so there he's coaching volleyball and they're like, why volleyball? Right. And he's like, I bet you the girls on my team, the high school girls on my team can beat most of you grown men in athleticism just because like all the running and jumping and hitting and just like quick reflexes side to side, whatever they do. But it's interesting because like, he's like, that wasn't a girls only sport back in New Zealand, but it is considered a girls only sport where he is now. And, the idea of acceptable athleticism versus not acceptable athleticism. Yeah.
So it is, it's definitely like cultural based. Because I really like, it's weird because in America, right, like high school level, usually high school, university level, there's usually it's women's only for volleyball. But then in the Olympics we have like a beach volleyball team. I'm like, why? Like, I don't understand this. Like
when
at
did
the
they
highest
learn?
level.
Although,
like,
I mean, I feel like Olympics is more interesting in the US anyway, right? Because you're not allowed to be a full-time professional athlete to be in the Olympic team in the US. Whereas like in other countries, they are. That is their full-time live, breathe. Well, not every other country, but like in a lot of them that they don't have that rule. So like that is their full-time living, breathing job. Like, in China, their gymnastics team is like their pride and joy. And they pick these kids up from schools, like even in really remote rural areas when they're like 6. Do you have potential? Cool. You leave your parents and you're going to come live with us, and that is the rest of your life until you're good enough to participate in the Olympics. Like
that's okay. I did not know it was like that. Okay.
Well, like 6 to 8, I think like any older than that they consider too old to become the caliber that they want. So I'm like, dang, right? Whereas in the US, it's like you literally cannot survive as an Olympic athlete unless you have a huge amount of sponsorships, because you need a job. You can't be a professional athlete and you have to have a day job doing something else, but somehow manage the training to be Olympic level. So
Mhm.
like, you know, to your point about like men's volleyball, I'm like, when did you train? How did you train? Like, when did you, well, at what point did you go, I'm going to pursue volleyball now and then get to that level?
Yeah, it's like, and especially if we're talking about like 6 or 8 being like too old, right? It's like,
Yeah.
when do you discover this talent? When do you, find time to cultivate it? And so it's,
Right.
that's a great question. I kind of want to know, honestly.
Yeah, right.
Um,
Um, so on those expectations, like, I mean, I know this was to do with adults, but I think for kids too, like I do know in history of Japan back in like the like turn of the 20th century where they were trying to become more westernized
mhm.
to look and be respectable, and they sent a lot of people off to Europe to learn like the social etiquette, the dancing, the whatever, so that when people visit Japan, they see like, wow, these beautiful ballrooms with these impeccably dressed
Yes.
couples, like ballroom dancing and all that. And yet, you know, there's like movies like Shall We Dance and stuff like that, which kind of show like, you know, it's still considered really weird for men to go like take dancing classes. It's almost like,
Mhm.
is he weird? Is he a pervert? Is he hiding something?
Yeah.
Um, like, is that still like very much the case? And is that the case, especially at like, you know, are there kids dance programs, I guess is what I mean, for things like this? And is that a socially acceptable hobby, especially for like boys or whatever to participate in?
Then, so up until a few years ago, that was the case where it was kind of no one danced. There was actually like a legal law that prevented establishments from letting people dance. So it's definitely a thing. Recently they did start incorporating more like hip hop, more like, dance into the school systems as a program. And so you do see a lot of Japanese kids on all levels now. So like you have like elementary, you have like middle school, high school, and then at the university they have like dance clubs. So I know someone who is a part of like a dance club, and they have several different styles. Like they have poppin', they have lockin', they have
Oh, nice.
crump. And so I feel like it's definitely very, it's a pretty, like, I don't know, popular among the younger generation. And it does seem like the older generation is trying to encourage that by implementing it in schools. But yes, typically Japanese men, especially Japanese men, do not dance. Like it's just they do not dance. And that's one of the things we have a problem with when we wanted to start, um, you know, developing the blues scene here, where, a lot of people, the Japanese women, they're like, oh, I want to dance. They see it
Right,
as like
right.
fitness or whatever, but the men are just like stiff, and it's just like, okay, we gotta work on this. But yeah, it wasn't a requirement for them. Their requirement was go to work, feed their family, and that's it.
Okay.
What else? You said, what was your other question?
Well, I mean, I think it was just about social acceptability and like,
Okay.
you know, do kids dance, or like, you know, is there programs or activities or that? Um, I mean, I was also asking like if that changes between like boys versus girls, but you know, I
Yes.
think that's probably less so of a oh, boys shouldn't dance if the primary ways they're incorporating is more hip hop, because I feel like that's an acceptable thing for boys to do versus like, you know,
Hmm.
if they were doing, I don't know, ballet in schools or something, it would probably be very different. Yeah.
Yes. But everyone knows how to do folk dances, like in each which is kind of like very interesting. But like for folk dances, like for like Ouen, which is usually during the autumn, kind of communicating with the spirits, there's a set dance to it. So both men and women, during this festival, they all like know this traditional folk dance. And each prefecture actually has its own unique folk dance. And so that is considered socially acceptable to dance.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, this is definitely like very, very cultural too, because like dances come with their cultural backgrounds and the, I guess the associations with them, right? Because it's like, you know, coupled partner dancing, like in certain societies is considered like super, super intimate, whereas in like other societies, it's like, okay, whatever, it's just dancing.
Yes.
And whatever, like the closer it is to home, the more it's like, oh, it's natural. That's not really dancing. That's just a ritual. Like, you know, everyone does it kind of thing. Yeah, that's interesting. Because I was thinking about it, like we have Thai folk dances. Like one of it is Ramwong, and like everyone, you know, no one officially learns it. It's a, you know, everyone just does it to different degrees of success, but like literally everyone does it. Like you'll find like kids in the market sort of like wiggling their butt and doing, you know, whatever with their hands, like to different degrees. And then, but you also see like funerals. There's long celebrations that go with that too. So you'll see like grandmas dancing at funerals the same. But then there's Thai classical dance, which, you know, is a very respected art form. But then that is like hours upon hours upon hours of training, because you need the training just to be able to bend your fingers and your hands and your legs in a certain way and to be able to move in certain ways. But even then, within then, like the male roles have a different type of athleticism than the female roles. Like men are trained a very specific way, women are trained one way, you know, primarily one to be more athletic. Like the males might Totsukan is one of it's a demon character. It's from Ramakien, which is like the Thai version of Ramayana. And so he's the demon. His role usually includes like, you know, backflips and things like that. Whereas, you know, the female characters' roles are primarily to go on and look very, very graceful. So they're still dancing and they still have the same levels of athleticism, but different types of athleticism expected with it. So yeah, it's like, you know, the female character shouldn't be doing a bunch of backflips and stomps and all that because it's not feminine, you know, so on and so forth. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I forgot to think about the folk dances. But yeah, folk dances are just not something that we learned. Well, I mean, except for like festivals and stuff, maybe they would be involved in school, but very rarely were there like classes or anything for that. It was just well, you know, you do this for enough years, year after year, you will learn how to do the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like for like Black Americans, it's like I don't know if I want to call it like folk dancing, but there's definitely like regional like dances, but vernacular. Yeah, okay, yeah. So
I still consider that a folk dance. I feel like it's hard anytime you're talking about the US, because it's like most people think of folk dances as associated with a certain ethnicity. And that just becomes very fuzzy in the US, because like I would say like a good 50% of the US, like they're like, I have no idea what my ethnicity is. It's like vaguely Black, vaguely white, like something mix of whatever. But like, you know, if there can be modern folk dances, in other words, just modern people's dances, then because these are cultures and regional too. So
that's true.
I mean, from things that come out in clubs to things that come out in like family gatherings, I would like categorize pretty much everything, every like 50 something dances that come out of the swing family would essentially be American, like, you know, Black American folk dances. Like folk, you know,
I understand. It's because it does spring forth from our culture, so I think folk or vernacular it's a good fit. It is like, I would consider that, because like maybe not, I don't know so much about Minnesota, but like for like maybe like Chicago, you know, steppin', you know, a lot of people, that's a big one. Like, oh, like, because it's like at a party, like, oh, like let's you know, do some steppin', and then people are like, oh yeah, I know this, and it's kind of like, because you're from that area, you somehow you grew up with it, you know about it, so you're expected to do it. Other things that are not regional based, but like more like, I don't want to say community, but maybe like, you know, as an overall, would be like group dances for like the Cupid Shuffle or something like that, or
Like,
or the wobble, right? That's
right.
like no matter where I go in the US, right? If there's like, you know, melanated people, like this is
Yeah, there's
when the song
there's
comes
so many
on.
line dance groups on. Yeah, I think in San Diego alone, there's 3 major soul line dance groups,
Oh wow.
which is interesting because like San Diego is 6% Black. And that's all
Uh,
inclusive. Like, don't matter if you're American, Caribbean, African. Like
mm-hmm.
that is the whole of the Black population in San Diego, and yet I think there's like 2 or 3 like line dance groups, like, you know, teams that will travel to different events together or wear the matching t-shirts, you know, on Sunday
Okay.
when it's like t-shirt day, it's like Velocity
Mm-hmm.
urban soul line dances, or, you know, whatever they like, they're repping there, or it'll be like, you know, Bay Area line dance,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that's, I feel like that's also a thing that, you know, if you're in the community, it's so big. And if
Mm-hmm.
you're not in the community, you don't know it exists. Because I think most
Exactly.
people, when they think line dances, they're thinking like country line dance. They don't
Mm-hmm.
realize like, no, there's a whole other. Right. Like these are the ones where like, if this song comes on at a club, at least half of the people are going to get up and do that line dance.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, and then there are other levels like for like fraternities and sororities, right? Where even I like I didn't know about how much like it's valued in our culture, right? Where it's just like, hey, you know, you have to like if you're an alpha or you're whatever, you know, group you're a part of, there's like a custom or unique dance or movements that belong in that group.
Right. When I told you about Blue Heart, like
Mm-hmm.
they learn these step routines for every single one so that they can show like, oh, you know, actually I'll send you a video after this, but like I'll also link it below.
Yes, yes,
But
please, please.
yeah, they do San Diego Kumbha Fest every year, and they do like the routines of all the different HBCUs and like and show off, you know. So it's really cool because it's you know, the whole, you can identify who's your brothers and sisters anywhere in
Mm-hmm.
the world based on like, you know, you make a certain call and they respond a certain way, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, you start the first half of a step and they finish it and you're like, yep, you're one of us. Yeah, for sure. One of my friends that I met up in Alaska for this
Mm-hmm.
play was also talking about growing up with like folk music festivals are really, really, really big in the Alaskan Native community.
Okay.
And so like even in the town he was in, which was like, you know, a few thousand people.
Mm-hmm.
And like, but anytime like a folk festival, like it was a regional thing, it's like that's the thing that literally everybody went to, from like the elderly to like the teeny tiny kids, because that was a big part of connecting in the culture.
Mm-hmm.
So not just like native dances, but like, you know, what you consider like sort of American folk music. So, which is kind of a weird thing to say because they're native, but you know, you know what I meant.
Yeah, it's yeah, that's why America is so like you really have to understand like the nuanced like connections and relationships within the, you know, within the nation in order to really speak about it at an educated level. And
Right.
that's one thing, like a lot of people who like I do like translation work for, localization work from, they when they ask me these questions about like America, I'm just like, I like please be
How do I
more
answer
specific.
this? I mean, like, you, I mean, you've mentioned before, like, you know, even kids, traditions and local traditions and expectations different from region to region across
Mm-hmm.
Japan. But you know, there, you said they're still very sort of ethnically homogenous. So like it's
Yes.
still, you know, other than certain areas, it's still, you know, Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
Versus like in the US, you have regional traditions, but you also have the influence of many different ethnicities.
Correct.
So like it was my understanding later on that a lot of like Minnesotan traditions were actually Finnish traditions, which I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like Finnish and Polish or something like that. So like everyone brings their own little piece into it. Or like, you know, people think of like pizza as an American thing, but that was, you know, originally Italian immigrants, right?
Yes. Same with hamburgers,
So,
right?
right. So it's like just all of these things, how that changes in your regional cultures, or like in Piedmont region, whether you're in the Appalachians, where you're talking about between like bluegrass and flat footing and buck dancing, which is just like, whether you came from a primarily white community or primarily Black community, but also there's a lot of this, is really like a mixture of like African and Irish traditions that came into this dance and music style. So it's like, and that is so very specific. Like you wouldn't go, if that was your only experience of the US, you might assume that everyone knew how to flat foot. And then you travel to anywhere outside that region and people are like, what now?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's just like a giant label of just like made in America. And then you kind of peel it back. You're like, actually imported from China, or actually imported from Africa.
Right. Well, I think that covers everything. So yeah, thank you, Mac. And also thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah. So once again, this is Borderless Conversations, and my name is Mac from Borderless Translations.
And my name is Elizabeth from Ouen Designs. Please subscribe and follow us on our website, blogs, social media, YouTube. All the links will be following this and in the caption below. Thank you. สวัสดีค่ะ